Joining us now to analyze the coverage in Vero Beach, Florida, Brian Kilmeade, co-host of Fox and Friends and of the Kilmeade Morning Show on Fox Radio, and author of the new book, Teddy and Booker T, How Two American Icons Blazed a Path for Racial Equality. And in Los Angeles, Leslie Marshall, the radio talk show host and Fox News contributor. Brian, do you agree that much of the media are nervous, anxious, depressed over President Biden's awful poll numbers and kind of hoping he'll drop out?
Wow. Jonathan Karl looked like he was going to break into tears over the fear that Donald Trump can get elected, when he should be known that he probably added 2 wings to his house because of the book sales, because of his last presidency. So I do think it's pretty extraordinary to blame Donald Trump for the off-year elections were anything but great for the Republicans. Listen, the midterms, absolutely. He handpicked candidates, Howie. There were Mastriano and others that were way out there that traditional Republicans probably would have done better, and he didn't really back them with money. You have every reason to criticize, but just pick your spots. He had nothing to do with this off-year election. In fact, he was late into the Kentucky election. That was a Mitch McConnell candidate.
Yeah.
Glenn Youngkin was on his own in Virginia. I mean, you don't have to reach. But they are trying to say, President Biden's old, but Donald Trump will destroy the country. And I just think they should start just treating Donald Trump at one point like a candidate.
Right.
Look at his policies. He spoke for 20 minutes on immigration. Look at what he said he's going to do. You don't have to have blazing headlines saying he will make you a fascist nation.
I'm going to get into that in 1 second, but let me turn to Leslie. Some liberal pundits, and it's not just David Axelrod, are openly saying the president should withdraw because they think a younger, fresher candidate would fare much better. Leslie.
With all due respect to David and those others that are saying that, my colleagues, that wouldn't be wise, just because politics is a numbers game. And who would be on the ticket? No disrespect to our vice president, but she would be on the ticket. She would be number 1, number 2 on the ticket, and her numbers are even worse than President Joe Biden. I know a lot of people want my governor. I would like someday for my governor, Gavin Newsom here in California, to run, but he's even said that's not going to happen. He's not going to step on or over Joe Biden, Kamala Harris. So I think that's unwise, especially at this point in the game. With respect to the poll numbers, the numbers that I look at more, I'm a Democrat. I'm not freaking out. I don't have any razor blades anywhere around me, guys. Look, the reason is the numbers that I'm looking at are the polling, the exit polling numbers. And what the polls are not predicting is the turnout of Democrats. What they're not predicting is how powerful certain issues such as abortion are. And certainly the disapproval ratings for Joe Biden are not trickling down, not only in the midterms, but last Tuesday. And my prediction, those are going to be the numbers we're going to see in the general.
Let me jump in here because I want to play some sound from Peter Doocy, who had a chance to ask the president about these polls.
Why do you think it is that you're trailing Trump in all these swing state polls?
Because you don't read the polls out. There are 10 polls. 8 of them, I'm beating them in those states. 8 of them. You guys only do 2. CNN and New York Times. Check it out.
We checked it out. Those are national polls. Some of them are 3-way races. Some of them, and a couple of them, the 2 candidates are tied. So, Brian, you started to touch on this earlier. New York Times, Washington Post, just a flood of stories about what Trump would do in the second term. He wants to go after his enemies, hire loyalists as opposed to traditional conservatives, crack down on immigration, invoke the Insurrection Act to be able to use the military domestically. What does this flurry of stories say to you?
That we got to scare people into not voting for him. And I'll give you an example, Leslie. You brought up, don't panic. It's still early, whatever. I understand where you're coming from, and he's going to be the nominee. The only thing that's different about this election, okay, there's a lot of things, but the one thing that's different is that many people are convinced, me included, that he can't do the job anymore. Did you see him try to lay a wreath yesterday for the unknown soldier? He puts the wreath up and doesn't know where to go. He doesn't know how to leave a stage. He couldn't even say a complete sentence to Peter Doocy. He doesn't give interviews. He has to go out and win it. If you're way left, way right, or in the middle, you have to be able to articulate what you're doing. And people do not think he's making the decisions. They want to know what unelected official is behind closed doors making the decisions, because the guy we see in front of us is not even the guy that got elected in 2020. And that's what I think Axelrod and Tim Ryan and Van Jones are saying. Not right-wing extremists.
Yeah.
They're saying this guy can't do the job. Work out your Kamala Harris situation, but there's other talent on the left. That's what they're saying.
Well, certainly President Biden does very few interviews, but he did do one recently with 60 Minutes. Leslie, I think the president's been hurt by the economy. He's been hurt by losing a chunk of the black vote, at least according to these polls. But again, the overriding issue, and we've talked about this, and it seems to be bothering a lot of Democrats, is his age.
Yeah, but this week I saw repeatedly, video clip after video clip of Donald Trump's talking about the current president, Barack Obama, who is not the current president.
As if, yeah.
So I mean, we want to split these things apart. And honestly, in defense of both of them, they're human. I went into the supermarket the other day and I couldn't remember what the heck I was getting, and I'm not in my 70s yet. Although I may feel it or even look it someday.
Come on,
yes,
Leslie.
yes.
There's no way. You can't compare yourself to Joe Biden. There's no way. And Donald Trump keeps saying that because he believes Obama's pulling the strings. I talked to him off camera about that. I talked to him on radio about that. I said, "Why?" And I corrected him on the radio interview. Please go back and listen. I said, "You mean Joe Biden?" He goes, "No, Joe Biden, he's convinced Barack Obama's running the country." That's why he says it. He wants you to think that.
Oh, Brian, come on.
And he thinks that's to
Come on,
his advantage.
that's good. That's good. You should be his manager, his campaign
Listen
manager.
to the
That's
interview.
good. That's a really good spin on that. No, that's a good spin on that.
I'm going to jump in, guys.
The bottom line
It's
is
not a
Democrats are going to vote left, Republicans are going to vote right. That's what the numbers show. It comes down to about 5 states and independents in those 5 states, and it has for the past few election cycles.
And he's losing in all of them.
Well, that's what sparked the
He's losing
concern.
in all of them.
So, Brian, the Republicans talking about this week's elections, keep losing on the abortion rights question, most notably in Ohio this week. But the pundits are very quick to declare, oh, well, this will really help Joe Biden. But I think, as you were saying, Trump didn't have much to do with this week's elections. I don't think Biden did either.
Yes, but Leslie, to your point, the abortion issue will be a deciding factor, and Republicans from the smallest county seat to the highest seat at the White House have to learn how to message it sincerely, and they haven't done that yet. And I don't think you can blame Ronna McDaniel because these consultants come in from the outside. They get a lot of money, and they don't call Ronna McDaniel for advice. I don't think you can blame her for that either. They have to go out and just say, listen, it's going to be 15 weeks, and this is where Europe's at. This is where most of America's at, and that's where we're comfortable with. I loved what Marco Rubio said. Marco Rubio says, I'm pro-life, but Florida isn't. So they're at 15 weeks. I'm going to be at 15 weeks. He wins going away in his election. Unless they get that right, it doesn't matter. But I was also struck by one of the things in the polls that says 51% of the people say there is no way they will vote for Joe Biden, and 48% says there's no way they'll vote for Donald Trump. So that little more play, believe it or not, actually could tip it to Trump. But the wild card factor is that third party.
Right. Well, if they stick with that, of course, they may change their minds, some of them. And Leslie, abortion certainly could boost Democratic turnout next year, but there will be several issues. The whole election won't be about abortion. It'll be about the economy. It'll be about Joe Biden's handling of the 2 wars. So I'm not sure that this helps the president's candidacy at all.
At the end of the day, if you right now are very angry with Joe Biden because you don't agree with him on Middle East policy, you're not pro-Israel, your alternative is Donald Trump. You're not going to flip that switch for him. And the same can be said for those that are unhappy with Donald Trump. Even if they're Republicans, they voted for him once, maybe even twice, but they don't want to go back. They want to go forward. They're not going to vote for Joe Biden. And abortion's a bigger issue. It's not just Ohio. Look what it did in Virginia. Yeah. The governor there, Youngkin, is pretty much powerless right now.
All right, I got to get a break. I know you have more to. After the New York Times ran an editorial opposing an Israeli ceasefire in the Mideast war, more than 100 outside journalists took over the paper's lobby, reading off the names of Palestinians killed in Gaza and names of editorial board members. The protesters accusing the paper of complicity in laundering genocide, declaring there is blood on the hands of the New York Times editorial board. Brian, what does it say when self-described journalists are so dedicated to the Hamas cause that they storm the New York Times building?
It's nuts, but didn't they plow this field and seed this field when they came out and told Barry and bullied Barry Weiss when she was a centrist at New York Times? She said, "I'm not welcome there. There was no room for other opinions." And didn't the New York Times also seed this field when they had a Tom Cotton column that just brought up a conservative point of view, and all of a sudden someone gets fired, they have a meltdown, they needed a mental health day? That's not the tolerance of different ideas. Now they come up with an idea, and the street that they mobilized turned on them. And they must be saying, wow, this reminds me of a little, and they must be feeling a little like Bill Maher. He looks around at the Democratic Party, many of which are the backbone and the subscribers to the New York Times, and says, what have we radicalized? These radicals have turned on us. And I am not for that, but that was an organized movement through their lobby that might have even had activism from the inside.
All right, Leslie, what do you think of that language? The New York Times has blood on its hands.
Well, it's certainly an opinion. I don't agree with that. I don't agree that anybody actually in the United States has, blood on their hands. I mean, certainly it's just there in the Middle East, Israel, Hamas, the Palestinians. But I do want to say something to what you just said, Howie. To me, a couple of things. One, journalists need to do their job, but they're also human beings who have a right to the First Amendment and to expressing free speech. And the New York Times, to Brian's point, I would agree, should have every opinion. Every media outlet should. However, it doesn't make them pro-Hamas. It doesn't make people who are pro-Palestinian or pro, like myself, just wanting peace on both sides for the children, or people who want a ceasefire, doesn't make them pro-Hamas, doesn't make them anti-Semitic. I can't stand how many days I'm called a self-loathing Jew or anti-Semitic because you want a ceasefire or you want the children to stop being hurt or being killed. But to say that the New York Times has blood in their hands, I don't agree with that.
I'm a little short on time, but let's just run through these. NBC News headline: Man dies after hitting head during Israel and Palestinian rallies, officials say. What happened was 69-year-old Paul Kessler, his death was ruled a homicide by the medical examiner caused by a blunt force injury to his head, this outside L.A. at a Palestinian protest. So, Brian, hitting head, does that describe the situation?
No, and within the column, it says a blunt force to the head. It was from the bullhorn, had killed him, and that came from the coroner's office. It wasn't that he tripped and fell and banged the back of his head. It was he hit the ground because he was struck in the head.
Yes.
I'm all for being measured, but at this point, when a Jewish man gets killed in a Palestinian Jewish protest, why are they so measured and, dare I say, inaccurate with the headline, when on the other side, if it was a Palestinian that was hurt, a Hamas sympathizer that was hurt, there wouldn't have been, sadly to say, it wouldn't have been that measured.
Leslie, just briefly.
And wrong.
Leslie, Washington Post headline: Gaza Health Ministry. Death toll in Gaza surpasses 10,000 after 4 weeks of war. And who runs the Gaza Health Ministry?
Hamas. However, you have to look to other sources if you're going to do your due diligence. Defense for Children International have verified these numbers. United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, the World Health Organization, rescue organizations like the White Helmets. All of these are putting out numbers as well. I would take those numbers. Being a talk show host, that's where I get my numbers from. I'm not getting them from Hamas.
I have more confidence,
and they're pretty closely
aligned. I have more
aligned.
confidence than I do in Hamas, which sometimes inflates casualty figures. Brian, I want to ask you a quick question about your book. Teddy Roosevelt invites Booker T. Washington to dinner at the White House, and there's all of this uproar. Memphis News Scimitar, you quote, "the greatest outrage which has ever been perpetrated by any citizen of the United States." What does that tell us about that period?
The period of that time, there was segregation, there was Jim Crow, there were poll taxes, and there were lynchings. Nobody's happy about it. I'm not ducking it. But I wanted to outline how two people in that time, as polarized and as wrong as some portions of the South were, said we could see a better time for America. We could be better examples for it. And look how much progress we've made since. And I also put in the special on Fox Nation, John McCain references its dinner. Think about it in America, what was an outrage to bring this prestigious black man to dinner, and now we have a African American, a black man who's going to be hosting that dinner. I think people really need to see how many people sacrifice to make us the most successful multicultural country in the world.
The book is Teddy and Booker T. Appreciate having you on, Brian Kilmeade. Leslie Marshall, thanks very
Dave.
much for joining.